Hello everyone, and happy holidays. This is son of Herodotus, and once again, it's that time of the year where we all come together to celebrate the holiday that we all know and love as Christmas. You've got the tree decorated, your Christmas shopping's all done, you're spending time with your friends and loved ones, and all the boys and girls are excited that Santa Claus is coming to town. But the one thing that I look forward to at Christmas time is the music, which can be heard throughout our community and in school concerts all across the country. However, Christmas music, or Christmas carols as they're called, serves a much more higher purpose. For Christmas is the time that we all celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And it's with that sentiment that we all raise our voices in song every December. The one person we should thank for that is Ron Clancy, who spent most of his life trying to find the meaning behind our beloved Christmas carols. So if you're ready, come along with me and let us begin with the book's introduction, as it is written in his own words. Best Loved Christmas Carols is derived from a larger Christmas music product titled The Millennia Collection, Glorious Christmas Music, Songs, and Carols, a deluxe international collection of 170 titles. The latter was born from the simple curiosity of wanting to know more about the origins and development of Christmas music. There were always intriguing questions. When did Christmas music begin? What did it sound like in the early centuries, or in the 13th, or 15th, or 17th centuries? Many books have been published about Christmas music, predominantly carol collections, but there has been no definitive work tracing the evolution of Christmas music from the early years of Christianity to the modern era. Much ground was covered to answer these questions in the Millennia Collection, and perhaps the reader might want to seek similar discovery there about the quite fascinating history of Christmas music. One will learn there is considerably more substance to the body of Christmas music than the limited number of traditional religious and secular standards that we are accustomed to hearing repeatedly each holiday season during the course of Christmas shopping, riding in our cars, or just plain relaxing at home. Some of the very best Christmas music actually is performed at various churches or concert halls during Advent or Christmastide, as part of musical programs staged by professional or amateur groups. When my friends suggested I pursue the idea of writing about the topic of Christmas music, I took their suggestion with little trepidation, yet in earnest. Ultimately, after years of trial and effort, the Millennia Collection had a life of its own, and from it, Best Loved Christmas Carols, the stories behind 25 Yuletide favorites, evolved. Because Christmas music is primarily distinguished by the popularity of its carols, this volume about our favorite carols was designated as a good starting point to begin the exploration of this well-loved but little understood topic. Although there has been quite a number of publications about Christmas carols over the years, many of them, even those of quality and reputation, have not reached a mass audience. One explanation for this phenomenon is that carol publications by their very nature are seasonal, and thus bookstore owners, particularly in today's highly competitive book trade, believe they do not merit long shelf life. Yet at the same time, in another part of the marketing world, millions of copies of carols and holiday songs are sold each Christmas season. Bearing this dichotomy in mind, Best Loved Christmas Carols was created, and during the course of its evolution, I tried to keep to the following objectives. 1. To compile a reasonably comprehensive international collection of Christmas music, songs, and carols, both religious and secular, with special attention to English language or American contributions. 2. To include interesting background information, whenever possible, about each of the carols. 3. To introduce a concise and informative historical perspective about Christmas carols, weaving in information about Christmas traditions and customs whenever possible, thus allowing the reader to understand the cultural context and how they might have sounded at given moments from the 14th to the 19th century. 4. To adorn the book with beautiful illustrations and art, many of them paintings from some of the great museums of the world, including scenes associated with the Nativity, such as the adoration of the shepherds, the visit of the Magi, as well as festive holiday activities. As much as possible, these images would reflect the country and the period in which a carol was composed. For example, a 16th century German carol would be illustrated by the work of a German artist from the same era, or a 19th century American Christmas greeting card or painting would accompany the creation of a 19th century American composer. And 5. To provide an exquisite audio collection, which includes the magnificent sounds of such musical stalwarts as the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the Vienna Boys Choir, the Royal Philharmonic Chorus, and others, with instrumental accompaniment by some of the world's preeminent orchestras, among them the London Symphony and the New York Philharmonic. The seed of inspiration for the Millennia collection and its various volumes was probably sown on an early Christmas when I was but one of 600 boys at St. John's Orphanage in Philadelphia. To this day, I have never forgotten the feeling of awe and wonderment I had as a first grader during my first midnight mass. The carols that were sung so beautifully by a choir of nuns on that memorable occasion kindled a love that has remained with me throughout the years. This volume is the legacy I hope to leave to lovers of Christmas carols around the world. Perhaps it may be shared by young children with their doting parents or grandparents, or by mothers and daughters reading to each other, or by a close friend stopping by for a holiday visit. Best-loved Christmas carols may even cause a harried mother or father lying comfortably in bed after a long day to pause long enough to take comfort in the soothing sounds of Christmas carols. It might serve as a trusty companion book for carolers on their seasonal rounds, or for spiritually or introspectively inclined persons attending a church-sponsored Christmas music program. If any such end should be accomplished, then immeasurable satisfaction will have been earned from an untiring effort to contribute something fresh and unique to the rich carol heritage of Christmas. In brief, Best Loved Christmas Carols was conceived and carried out in the spirit of that wonderful season. Best Loved Christmas Carols is a labor of love that was pursued to provide consumers of Christmas audio music, many of them repeat customers, a packaging alternative that not only satisfies their annual needs, but also appeals to their aesthetic inclinations for information and color. This volume about our favorite Christmas carols offers readers 3 special elements not normally found in other Christmas music products. 1. Well-researched information. 2. Wonderful illustrations. And 3. Beautiful music. Containing 25 of our most familiar carols, primarily from the United Kingdom and the United States, Best Loved Christmas Carols adds carol gems from Germany, France, and Austria to the mix. To familiarize the reader with how our favorite carols have achieved their time-honored status, the ensuing historical perspective traces the evolution of carols from the 14th to the 19th century. The first carol, according to legend, was sung by angels appearing to the shepherds of Bethlehem and declaring the birth of Christ. and peace to men of good will. Derived from the French word carol, originally meaning a round dance and in later years a joyful religious song, the carol is the musical form by which Christmas is best known. The best modern definition of carol is probably that of Percy Dearmer, co-author of the Oxford Book of Carols, a compilation published in 1928. He described the carol as a song with a religious impulse that is simple, popular, and modern. A carol is folk-like in character. It is simple, has little pretense to it, has plain lyrics, and is a seasonal song. Today, most people think of carols as strictly Christmas songs, and it is estimated that 4,000 to 5,000 carols exist, most of them in the realm of the obscure. In fact, carols originally came from secular and pagan sources. The Greeks sang them in their plays, and the Romans used them during Saturnalia, one of their major festivals celebrating the winter solstice. They were quite popular and were sung for weddings, birthdays, and other festivities. Later, from the early 14th century until the outset of the Reformation, the carol was more aptly defined as a poem suitable for singing, made up of uniform stanzas, and provided with a burden, or an external refrain, repeated after each stanza. Very few vernacular carols were known prior to the 14th century due to several reasons: church interference in people's everyday affairs, the predominance of Latin usage, and obscurity. The 14th century witnessed a time of real troubles for the Christian church. Because of various abuses, the failure to observe religious vows, and the overt worldliness of the clergy, the church could no longer count on total allegiance from its members. In the sphere of music, this disengagement contributed to the composition of more secular music, the inspiration for which was found in a non-liturgical world. Secular music even invaded the ecclesiastical sphere, causing bitter complaints from members of the clergy, and Gregorian chant, the preferred music of the Christian church, began to be eclipsed by the new music. One might note that for centuries, music was given its greatest impetus by the Christian church. From the dawn of the church until the late medieval era, the history of music in the Western world was related to the liturgy. Music was made to become the servant of the Christian faith, and there is little evidence of the existence of non-liturgical or folk music before the 12th century, save for precious few extant examples of notated secular music, a point of fact not disputed by historians. Music was just another area where the church intruded upon the everyday affairs of its members. Resentment against this intrusion gave rise to the development of the democratic spirit. One way for people to register their displeasure was to write songs, many of them secular in nature, about love, drinking, parodies of church liturgical texts contorted to secular interpretations, the Crusades, and other subjects. By the 14th century, songs with vernacular lyrics, as opposed to church Latin, began to appear more frequently, further laying the groundwork for the developments of carols. With the dawning of the Renaissance, the rising of secular compositions continued unabated. Some of these compositions included carols. Though many carols were religious in content, they were essentially non-liturgical in nature. The origin of carols cannot be understood without recognizing their linkage to dancing. Like singing in the early church, dancing had been frowned upon by church authorities because they considered it immoral and associated with heathen worship. But long before the birth of Christianity, dancing and singing had existed together with religion. The Romans had religious dances, as did the Druids and other religious priests, and eventually these dances found their way into the Christian church. Dancing in the church, however, was outlawed after the occurrence of some scandals. The Council of Toledo in 589 and the Council of Avignon in 1209 separately banned dancing entirely from church worship, but dancing still accompanied the singing of songs and carols outside the church. Dancing while singing carols was even part of the outdoor nativity worship services led by St. Francis of Assisi, and in later centuries, performers danced and sang carols during the mystery plays. Some historians credit St. Francis of Assisi for introducing carols and dancing in 1223 at the first manger scene of record in Greccio, a small Italian village. The townspeople provided inspiration for St. Francis, who had taught God's love by leading a humble and exemplary life, including respect for creatures around him. St. Francis, in turn, encouraged his friars to build a living monument to the Babe of Bethlehem. They all believed Christmas should be celebrated as a natural reenactment of Christ's birth, a stark contrast to the rigid ceremonial religious rites performed amid so much pretentiousness and ornamentation inside the church. St. Francis requested and was granted special permission from the Pope to conduct midnight mass before the manger scene, which was erected in the open air, surrounded by an ox, an ass, sheep, and shepherds, and there he led the villagers and friars carrying torch lights in singing carols of the Nativity. The simple practice of reenacting the first Christmas slowly spread throughout all of Europe and England. The crèche scene would become the most cherished Christmas motif in France, and other countries of Europe and Western civilization would forever incorporate the manger theme as part of Christmas festivities. Along with this development, the singing of carols was flourishing. Anonymous singers, whose works constitute much of this collection, made up joyful songs that were part of an oral tradition long before they became part of the written record. During the latter part of the medieval period, from 1095 to 1453, most carols were still sung in Latin, although on an ever-decreasing scale, and after the year 1400, use of the vernacular language for carol compositions was more common. The medieval period was also a time when the democratic spirit continued to emerge, further aiding carol development. Carols were a reaction to the overemphasis of religion, and many of their tunes were sung to profane words. Common people everywhere in Europe wanted to loosen the grasp of the church on their everyday affairs. One way of expressing this thirst for more freedom was to dance, write, and sing songs in the vernacular tongue, without any of the restraints of church Latin. The composition of carols gave people a vent for ordinary expression. Although carol verses might sometimes be sung as a modified form of plain chant or plain song, referring to Gregorian chant, the medieval liturgical music of the Christian Church, the timeless, contemplative melodies of the Church were increasingly forsaken, and so began the era of modern music. Briefly stated, the carol was a modern means through which the ordinary man could express his feelings and temper religion's conservatism. As the feudal order continued to collapse in Europe and England during the 15th century, this modernization was largely accomplished. Another influence on the music and songs of the Middle Ages was the production of religious plays by guilds. Guilds could be favorably compared to today's large corporations from an organizational perspective, but they were very productive and against free trade. They also helped to finance churches and cathedrals and to prepare and stage the miracle and mystery plays that were exceedingly popular in Europe and England. Each guild took responsibility for a specific religious scene, providing, besides finances, the costumes and music for the production. Guilds were quite numerous. Venice had 58, Genoa 33, Florence 21, Cologne 26, and Paris 100, and they were well represented in every important town in England. The Guild's production of religious plays was an impetus for the flowering of carols, particularly in England, although Latin usage would still be prominent in the 13th and early 14th centuries. Mystery plays were also an important source of carols. These plays, with their powerful music and literary material, helped ordinary people, many of whom were illiterate, learn the biblical stories. The theme of mystery plays was usually the life of Jesus Christ. Mortality plays involved allegorical representations of various virtues and vices. Miracle plays dealt with the saints and their lives. These plays were performed either on a fixed stage, where people went to see them, or in a procession in which a series of carts passed as a pageant with people looking on, much as floats in a parade today. The singing of carols became an integral part of the mystery plays. The audience was quite taken by carols because of their immense appeal, and on occasion, near riots erupted if these popular carols were not sung during a play's performance. In England especially, the carol was a byproduct of the mystery plays. The earliest surviving carols were often found in manuscripts relating biblical or legendary stories of the Nativity, the Virgin Mary, and the Crucifixion, the same stories depicted in the mystery plays. But there were also carols composed for the New Year, drinking and carousing, the commemoration of historical events, and other secular occasions. Today we know carols as essentially an English phenomenon, although France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the Czech Republic have made major contributions to carol development on the European continent. Poland, Austria, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Belgium have also added significantly to the repertoire. The contributions of the United States and other countries of the Western Hemisphere were not felt until the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. The theme of the carol was one of love, particularly in respect to the portrayal of a mother's tender instincts for her child. In the early days of the vernacular carol, this maternal picture was also symbolized by the rose, which represented perfection, and the Virgin Mary. The symbol of the Virgin Mary could be found in the rose windows of the great cathedrals, such as Notre Dame or Chartres, where it was enshrined as masterpiece creations of the medieval era. About 500 medieval carol manuscripts have survived in England, some in several versions. More than 100 carols from the late 15th and 16th century have musical settings in simple melody or elaborate polyphonic settings. The English medieval carol, however, has no connection to the French Nowell, despite the frequent reference to the word Noel as an exclamation of joy in a carol. The subject of English medieval carols could be anything. The French Nowell, however, was strictly dedicated to Christmas carols. The word Noel was used by Geoffrey Chaucer in his late writings. The development of carols coincided with that of folk songs and polyphonic music, although the medieval carol settings, music composed or arranged to fit a text, were not derived from folk songs but from a simpler art form. The royal courts of Europe patronized music and musicians, and rulers sponsored choirs in their favorite churches. These choirs were quite attuned to polyphonic music and carols, as well as to secular and folk songs. The popularity of carols reached the point where they began to be printed in small books. The first collection of carols may have been printed in 1521 in England by Wynkyn de Worde, about whom nothing else is known. Some collections contained not only English carols, but also French Noels and German Christmas songs. Perhaps the finest collection of carols on the European continent in the 16th century was Piae Cantiones, meaning sacred songs. This 1582 songbook was in use for centuries in the Swedish realm, especially in Finland, which was then under Sweden's rule. It had 74 songs, less than half from sources in France, England, Germany, and Bohemia, now the Czech Republic. Piae Cantiones was compiled by a Finnish student, Theodoricus Petri Rutha, son of an aristocratic landowner, and contained both church and school songs dating from the period 1350 to 1450, including the carol tunes for Good King Wenceslas and Good Christian Men Rejoice. By the early 16th century, the carol had become a more refined form of composition. The richness and color of the Renaissance, plus the increasing secularity that characterized the literature and art of the age, had its influence on song and carol compositions. The poetic texture of carols was still apparent, but the scope of the carol had narrowed to the Advent and Christmas stories. In France, the carol, or Noel, came into greater vogue by the late 15th century and was composed specifically for the Christmas season. The first Noels supposedly came from songs of troubadours and from songs about St. Francis and his manger scene. In England, where the carol was composed for any season and might be secular or sacred, the emphasis was moving more towards Christmas themes. The carols, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, and the First Nowell were most likely composed in 16th century England, and from Germany would come the popular O Tannenbaum. The carol had become popular music, achieving a lofty status during that era, but it would be short-lived in its existing form. By the 16th century, the development of music no longer relied on the church for its greatest support, especially since music was used to challenge church repression. The influence of the church, moreover, had continued to wane seriously with respect to matters of the soul, not to mention songs and music. With the ushering in of the Age of Reformation, a whole new dynamic was reshaping the religious landscape of Christian Europe. The history of this change would also affect Christmas and its music. Martin Luther, a German monk and leader of the Reformation, was a lover of German music and folk songs, which may have been the finest in Europe. He felt that the church liturgy was too aristocratic, having become snobbish over the years, and too detached from the common people. This detachment was embodied in the church's practice of keeping the priest and the all-male choir who sang the Mass separated from the worshippers. Luther sought reforms in music, as he sought change in theology, ethics, ritual, and art. He loved polyphony and wanted music that would move people by fusing faith and song. Luther encouraged a greater participation by the congregation in singing, and he simplified the music from choir plain song to easy harmony, thus reducing the role and influence of the Mass. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Reformation extended the range of choral music beyond the liturgy, and the informal group singing of songs was highly encouraged, leading to a greater familiarity with Christmas hymns. The founders of some Protestant sects did not like the idea of music being played at all in the church, however, and put limits on such activities. Their restrictions also led to a sharp reduction of boisterous observations of Christmas, although they welcomed joyful hymns as long as they adhered to scriptural meaning. In England, the extremes of the Reformation were being carried out by the Puritans, who reverted to the strictness of the Dark Ages. The Puritans strongly disliked music in churches and abolished it because they considered music an obstacle separating God from the worshipper. They advocated Blue Sundays and detested how Christmas was celebrated with merrymaking, dancing, and singing. They attributed many Christmas customs to pagan origins and demanded that Christmas be made a solemn day of atonement. In a 1644 decree from the Puritan Parliament, Christmas was declared a fast day as it fell on the last Wednesday of the month, which at that time was preserved and commemorated as the normal fast day. In 1647, Christmas was abolished entirely. The severity of these restrictions would influence the English people to believe that dancing before the altar was an embarrassment. Even with the onset of the Restoration and the ascension of Charles II to the throne of England in 1660, the Puritans would retain spiritual sway in England and America. Carols fell into disfavor during the Reformation because of their linkage to Catholic Rome and its quote-unquote superstitious practices, and because they had lost much of their vitality with the changing of the religious temper of the 16th century. In the English-speaking world, the Puritan extremes led to a 200-year hiatus of quality carol composition. The English Reformation, which had begun with the suppression of Christmas rites and celebration and had influenced the further decline of Latin and lullaby carols, witnessed the rise of carefree secular carols, merrymaking, dancing, and drinking, only to have these excesses quickly halted by the strict Puritans. One of the positive aspects of this period was that all of the distress caused by the Puritan regime nurtured a deeper understanding and a more serious inward turning of the religious spirit of Christmas. In the countryside, the common folk of the 17th century kept the spirit of the carol alive despite the disapproval of the upper classes and the Protestant churches, inside of which the crucifixion was considered much more important than the nativity. Such severe religious emphasis also contributed to the decline of the carol. In America, the Puritan restrictions on Christmas affected the colonies of New England. The Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620 shunned any observance of Christmas Day and treated it as a normal working day. In 1659, a law passed by the Massachusetts Bay Colony forbade anyone from, quote-unquote, observing any such day as Christmas, or that person would be fined 5 shillings. The law remained on the books for 22 years. Even after Christmas was fully restored in England, its observance was still severely opposed in New England for many years. In other regions of North America and the colonies, however, Christmas was highly celebrated by pageantry and song. The Dutch in New Amsterdam, the French in Louisiana and Missouri, the Episcopalians in Virginia, and the Moravians in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Winston-Salem, North Carolina, sang carols at Christmas time as they had in their native countries. America's southern colonies celebrated Christmas in aristocratic fashion. The English form of narrative ballad-like Christmas texts, which had little connection with the medieval carol, was hawked on English streets as broadside ballads cheaply printed and sung to popular tunes of the times. These ballads also appeared in the American colonies during the 18th century and could be found along with native folk hymns. Many of these early hymns were crude in form because the colonial composer was less exposed to sophisticated music and less educated, by and large, than the English composer. Like his Old World counterpart, though, his songs of the people were readily understood. Churchgoers in the American colonies in the late 17th to early 18th century were likely to sing the hymns of Isaac Watts, the English poet, since they were still closely allied to Puritanism, spurning most carols in favor of hymns. Watts wrote the poem Joy to the World, but it would be another 120 years before the American music teacher Lowell Mason would compose the music for Watts' lyrics. During the 18th century, the carol endured a precarious existence Yet a few important carols were composed. The lyrics of Hark, the Herald Angels Sing were penned by Charles Wesley, an English clergyman and co-founder of Methodism. Adeste Fideles was composed around 1740 by an English Catholic exiled to Douai, France. However, compared to the beautiful carol gems of the 14th and 15th century England, such as There Is No Rose, the Boar's Head Carol, and Lollet My Liking, the quality of the English carol in the 18th century paled. The quality of carol coming from the European continent was considerably better. The French Nowell, such as Les Ans d'une campagne, demonstrated the typical French flair for grace and charm. German carols manifested the religious and tender impulses of their composers. In churches, Protestants of all denominations dictated exclusive use of the vernacular for all divine services. The Lutherans especially relished the hymns of Martin Luther or the harmonization of German hymns by Bach. In England, Scotland, and the United States, prayers were spoken and hymns sung in the English language. Yet in the great cathedrals and churches of France, Spain, and Italy, and in the rough-hewn churches of Catholic parishes and colonies in the New World, the language of Latin dominated the Mass and other Catholic services. Gregorian chant was still employed, most often accompanied by instrumental music. The status of the carol, meanwhile, was stagnant in England. The effects of the Puritan era still could be felt by churchgoers in the early 19th century. In the countryside, though, common people maintained the oral traditions and kept some of the carols alive and vibrant. In 1822, Davies Gilbert of England compiled a carol collection titled Some Ancient Christmas Carols and had it published. The first of several important carol collections that would be published in 19th century England, Gilbert's compilation seemed to address the unfulfilled needs of the public for the resurrection of carols, especially Old English folk carols. 11 years later, another collection of English carols was compiled by William Sandys. The 1833 printing of Christmas carols, ancient and modern, helped to further revive interest in the English carol. Or was it really the other way around? The people's interest in carols may have spurred the printing of them. In the successive years of 1839 and 1840, the music for Joy to the World and Hark, the Herald Angels Sing was composed, although the music for the latter, the work of Felix Mendelssohn, was intended as a musical celebration for the 400th anniversary of the invention of printing by Johann Gutenberg. In 1843, an important seasonal literary work by Charles Dickens had a large impact, especially when it was enacted on the theater stage. His classic, A Christmas Carol, won over a large audience that enjoyed the singing of carols and other aspects of Christmas celebration. This was the very same year the first Christmas card was created in England. With the presence of the German Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's consort, at Windsor Castle, German Christmas customs, such as setting up a Christmas tree, became more fashionable in English court life. When a picture of the tree at Windsor Castle was published in an 1848 edition of the London Illustrated News, the English populace eagerly emulated their trend-setting monarchs. Dickens' contemporary in the United States, Washington Irving, loved English customs and traditions. With carol singing and celebrations of Christmas sweeping the English public, Irving, through his writings, encouraged his fellow Americans to partake of similar holiday festivities. This was no simple matter. America had disdained anything associated with the English since the end of the Revolutionary War. As they distanced themselves from English traditions, they were more apt to adopt Christmas customs brought to America by Dutch explorers from much earlier years. Even Washington Irving had prominently mentioned Sinterklaas, the venerable Dutch figure of St. Nicholas, 6 times in his The Knickerbocker History of New York. Irving's endorsement of English Christmas customs, the influence of Prince Albert and Queen Victoria in England and the United States, plus the popularity of A Christmas Carol, helped to develop the American Carol. American songwriters soon made significant contributions to the international carol repertoire. In 1849, Edmund H. Sears, a clergyman, wrote the poem "It Came Upon the Midnight Clear." James S. Pierpont wrote the words and music for Jingle Bells in 1857, the first and most famous of American secular carols. In the same year, John H. Hopkins composed "We Three Kings of Orient Are." Another poem made famous as a carol was "O Little Town of Bethlehem," written by the Reverend Phillips Brooks in 1868 for his Sunday school children in Philadelphia. These new carols of the mid-19th century helped to end the 200-year drought of quality English language carols. Elsewhere in the Christian world, original carols were composed between 1800 and 1850. On a cold Christmas Eve in 1818, a Catholic priest and the church organist of their small village church in Austria had to improvise for music when the church organ broke down. They proceeded to compose a quiet, dignified carol accompanied by guitar. Their effort produced one of the most stirring carols ever written, Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, Silent Night. In Catholic France, some church authorities regarded Cantique De Noel, O Holy Night, written in 1847, as a distasteful bit of music, and, as usual, the people thought otherwise. They loved it. A movement to sing carols inside Protestant churches emerged in England. English church elders were not enthusiastic about this development. Some of the carols, they felt, were less serious and more festive in nature, certainly not the type to be sung in church. Good King Wenceslas and The Holly and the Ivy were carols put into this category. From the middle to late 19th century, the English people had come to accept the popularity of carols both inside and outside their churches. They enjoyed the continual publication of Christmas carols, eagerly bringing them home to their families and friends. Important carol publications of this period were Collection of Ancient Christian Carols by Edmund Setting, a Catholic author who, along with John Mason Neale, was part of the Oxford movement that sought to revive Catholic liturgy. Songs of the Nativity by W. H. Husk. Christmas Carols New and Old by H. R. Bramley and Dr. John Stainer, and the 2 editions of Carols for Use in Church by R. R. Chopp. In the United States, another important carol hymn was published in 1885. Away in a Manger was actually an anonymous Christmas composition that for years had been erroneously attributed to Martin Luther, even being titled in his name as Luther's Cradle Hymn. The rightful composer of the music for this lovely carol was discovered to be James Murray, an American compiler of songbooks. When the 19th century came to a close, the carol had claimed its rightful place in the hearts of English-speaking people everywhere. The shadows from the Puritan clouds had finally receded. The carol was in a robust state of health, and the 20th century would witness its continued growth. The increased popularity of carols continued unabated well into the 20th century. Newer methods of transmitting music, beginning with the late 19th century introduction of the phonograph, and in later decades successive technology leaps to radio and television, helped to sustain the ever-increasing demand for Christmas carols and songs. Even popular singers from the United States and Europe including famous personalities employed by the opera, were recording favorite carols. Their musical efforts were rewarded by an eager audience, and as the century moved along, marketers of the genre noticed the trend of ever-increasing sheet music and audio recording sales. To a large extent, the increase in sales of Christmas music was a direct result of sophisticated marketing techniques used to promote music, especially when popular singers recorded their own Christmas albums. To some extent, these techniques have helped to preserve the legacy of Christmas carols, even if the methods of promoting Christmas music collections have grown static through decades of heavy reliance on familiar marketing formulas. But the richness of the carol bounty in this volume has less to do with what has transpired in the modern era. Credit goes largely to the carol composers and collectors from the 14th to 19th centuries, many of them anonymous, who hailed from the countryside of England, Europe, and the United States. It was they who first preserved the contemporary and exciting carol style of music, either through the oral tradition or by publication. The fact that some of them had to overcome periods of religious repression and the often fickle objections of conservative church elders only adds more luster to their accomplishments. As each new Christmas season falls upon us, we might be mindful that our carol heritage was begun and sustained over the centuries by the inspired efforts of intrepid carol composers and collectors. Their contributions were especially significant, and we are forever in their debt. To them, we dedicate this volume, Best Love Christmas Carols. The miniature masterpiece, Adeste Fideles, was composed by John Francis Wade, a Roman Catholic, between 1740 and 1743. The Latin lyrics were first published in 1760 in evening offices of the church, and the melody and lyrics were printed together in a London publication, an essay on the church plain chant, in 1782. One of the most popular of those Christmas hymns, intended to be sung as part of a church service, it is now sung in both Protestant and Catholic churches throughout the world. Some authorities erroneously believe the carol was an old Latin piece originally danced and sung around the creche. Other authorities incorrectly attribute it to Saint Bonaventura, a Franciscan scholar who was but 5 years old when the pious founder of his religious order, St. Francis of Assisi, died. In addition, some sources say that the tune was written by John Reading, another Englishman, but music research scholars dismiss this claim as inauthentic. Since the end of the 18th century, the hymn has been sung at benediction of the Mass during the Christmas season in England and France. Wade was a resident at the English College in Douai, France, where he copied, taught, and sold music in addition to providing music lessons for children. In 1852, the Reverend Francis Oakley, an English clergyman who became a convert to the Roman Catholic Church, published the English lyrics, although he had translated the Latin text 11 years earlier. Oakley's original text started with a more rigid phrasing, "Ye faithful, approach ye." Adeste Fideles has also been referred to as the Portuguese hymn, because it was believed for a time to have been first sung by the famous choir of the Portuguese chapel in London. This would not have been an unlikely scenario, as Wade was known to have corresponded with prominent Catholic musicians of the foreign embassy chapels there, including Thomas Arne, a highly respected English composer. Although an integral part of the modern Christmas music repertoire, the beauty of Adeste Fideles is the preservation of its ancient lyrical moorings. Words for Angels from the Realms of Glory first appeared in the Sheffield, Scotland newspaper The Iris on Christmas Eve in 1816. Written by James Montgomery, a journalist and editor of that newspaper for 31 years, the lyrics would have come naturally to this devout Christian, who composed hundreds of hymns during his lifetime. Montgomery was quite popular with his readership. In the early days of his newspaper career, he dared to criticize local government authorities, an action that caused his imprisonment on 2 occasions. He championed a number of unpopular cases, including the abolition of slavery and reform for boy chimney sweeps. In addition, he was a strong advocate of the Bible Society and overseas missions. Making the most of one prison stay, he wrote a book titled Prison Amusements, which served to bring him more admirers, much to the chagrin of the town's political establishment. At first, the music for Angels from the Realms of Glory was the tune written for the 18th century French carol Les Agnes de nos campagnes, which also inspired Montgomery's lyrics. This is the tune that was sung almost exclusively in England. However, in the United States, another tune called Regent Square, composed by Henry Smart, would eventually replace the original melody. What makes Henry Smart's contribution to the Christmas repertoire all the more remarkable is that he had gone blind 2 years before composing the music. Today, only 3 to 4 stanzas are usually sung, although the original composition had 5 stanzas. A well-known carol hymn of obscure origins, Away in a Manger may have been composed by a member of the German Lutheran colony in Pennsylvania during the late 19th century. For years, the hymn was thought to have been composed by Martin Luther, the great German religious reformer, and was often referred to as Luther's cradle hymn. However, by the 1940s, it was proven conclusively that the music for Away in a Manger was actually composed by James Ramsay Murray, the person who had perpetrated the myth of Luther's cradle hymn. Murray, who probably allowed his fanciful imagination to get the better of him, certainly not the first time that someone got heady from the Christmas experience, published his lullaby in an 1887 Cincinnati collection called Dainty Songs for Lads and Lasses. Since then, at least 41 known tunes have been associated with the carol, including those of Jonathan E. Spillman and William J. Kirkpatrick, whose familiar settings are more likely to be heard in England. The anonymous words for the first two stanzas appeared several years earlier in the Little Children's Book for Schools and Families, a publication of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in North America. These words may have come from a poem commemorating the 400th anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther, although many modern hymnals attribute the lyrics of the third stanza to John T. McFarland, a member of the American Lutheran Board of Sunday Schools. It is believed that he had merely made reference to it. The third stanza, which first appeared in an 1892 Louisville, Kentucky Lutheran Church collection titled Gabriel's Vineyard Songs, is probably the contribution of another anonymous author. This lyrical addition strengthens the inherent tenderness of this renowned American carol hymn.
For
Written in 1847 and first published around 1855, Cantique De Noel, O Holy Night, was originally disliked by French church authorities who criticized the carol for its perceived lack of musical taste. The carol did not sound like typical church music, instead possessing a more emotional and secular feel. This would not be the first time that conservative church officials had objected to something new and different, although their repudiation of the song was more likely due to Placide Cappeau's later renunciation of both Christianity and his 1847 lyrics. French churchgoers, however, had an entirely different reaction to this exotic new carol. It was quite popular with them. The composer of the music, Adolphe Adam, was better known for his ballets, particularly his well-acclaimed Giselle. John Sullivan Dwight, an American clergyman, writer of music, and co-founder of the Harvard Music Society, translated the carol. His English translation is used most frequently today. No matter in which language the carol is sung, the beauty, vibrancy, and unmistakable dramatic phrasing of Cantique de Noel adds luster to the ever-growing Christmas repertoire. very little is known about Deck the Halls with Boughs of Holly. The melody for this familiar and popular Welsh carol can be found in a 1784 song collection called Musical and Poetical Relics of the Welsh Bards, but it is associated with another Welsh carol known as Nos Galan, meaning New Year's Eve. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the great Austrian composer, used the melody for one of his compositions, a duet for violin and piano. The familiar lyrics, whose first known printing was in the 1881 New York publication, the Franklin Square Song Collection, are sometimes thought to have originated in America, perhaps because Washington Irving, a 19th century author and devotee of English traditions and customs, was influential in encouraging carol composing and singing in America. By this time, the Puritan influence on Christmas customs had been loosened both in England and the United States. One of our cheeriest Christmas carols, Deck the Halls with Boughs of Holly, was sung in the style of madrigals, or simple poetry set to music. Italian and English madrigals of the 16th century consisted of 12 lines of poetry sung to music. English madrigals could be more festive and humorous and include nonsensical words such as fa la la la. The roots of the Italian madrigal came from medieval times.
Deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la. Don we now our gay apparel, fa la 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 la. Troll the ancient Yuletide carol, fa la 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 la. See the blazing Yule before us, fa la 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 la. Strike the harp and join the chorus, fa la 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 la. Follow me in merry measure, fa la 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 la. While I tell of Yuletide treasure, fa la 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 la. Fast away the old year passes, fa la 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 la. Hail the new ye lads and lasses, fa la 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 la. Sing we joyous all together, fa la 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 la. Heedless of the wind and weather, fa la 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 la.
The original version of the exquisite Es ist ein Ross entsprungen may have come from the German Rhineland, with no less than 22 stanzas. Later reduced to a mere 16 stanza piece, this classic is now normally sung in 1, 2, or 3 stanzas. The carol has had several English translations, including the first 2 stanzas here by the noted American music scholar Theodore Baker. The translation for the 3rd stanza is credited to Harriet R.K. Spayeth. There are a number of other titles and interesting versions, including an 1896 chorale prelude by Johannes Brahms. The music was first published in the Catholic hymnal Geistlich Kirchengesang from Cologne around 1599 or 1600. Michael Praetorius, one of the most distinguished composers of his time and the greatest master of Protestant church music, harmonized this folk tune and published it in his voluminous Wassail Song in 1609. Praetorius, who was highly influenced by Italian Baroque music, used the Lutheran chorale texts as the basis for many of his church compositions. Es ist ein Ross entsprungen, a favorite of a cappella choirs during the Christmas season, is an example of this Praetorius technique. The inspiration for the carol comes from Isaiah 11:1, with the words,
"And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots."
Most often, this beloved carol is spelled the First Nowell, giving rise to the common misconception that the song is of French origin. But the First Nowell is the correct spelling. Noel is an English word dating back as far as the 14th century, when Geoffrey Chaucer used the term in his medieval masterpiece The Canterbury Tales. Most likely originating from the Cornwall region of southwest England in the 16th century, the words for the shepherd's song were not published until 1823, and the music until 1833. The origin of this joyous tune remains a mystery. It most likely was the type of Christmas tune that would have been suppressed by the Puritans in the mid-17th century. The refrain of the 1833 melody was revised by the 1870s, with the current smooth notes for the words, "Born is the King," replacing an uninspired passage. Over time, the First Nowell has become one of the finest of English carols. For purposes of distinction, the carol, the First Nowell, reputedly comes from Cornwall as well, because its lyrics are quite similar to those of the First Nowell. The word Nowell comes from the Latin word natalis and is commonly thought of as a French translation for Christmas carol. Nevertheless, the French Nowell should not be confused with the First Nowell. The familiar melody of the First Nowell was composed by Henry John Gauntlet in the mid-19th century. Gauntlet, besides being an English composer of some stature, was also an organist and organ designer, music critic, and teacher. Felix Mendelssohn thought very highly of him as a professor of music. God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen is one of the best-known carols from England. A cheerful dance tune, it uses a natural minor scale, called a mode in medieval form, that produces a unique and delightful sound effect. The carol probably originates from London and may have first been published by E. F. Rimbaud in 1846, although the text was collected by William Sandys in his 1833 volume, Christmas Carols, Ancient and Modern. Since then, other tunes have been found, but this version is believed to be the original. The carol would have been sung by the waits of olden England. Waits were generally municipal employees and watchmen whose specific duties included singing Christmas carols and songs at city or town-sponsored events. Prior to its publication in 1846, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen had gained popularity when it was used in Charles Dickens' famous 1843 story, A Christmas Carol, which subsequently became a successful stage play, first in England and then in the United States. The year 1843 also marks the beginning of another interesting Christmas custom in England, the creation of the first Christmas greeting card. Soon, Christmas lovers in the United States were emulating yet another English custom. By the 1880s, American greeting card companies, such as Louise Prang Company of Boston, were sponsoring prize-winning contests for illustrators of Christmas cards.
God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day, to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. From God our heavenly Father, a blessed angel came, and unto certain shepherds brought tidings of the same, how that in Bethlehem was born the Son of God by name. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Fear not, then said the angel, let nothing you affright. This day is born a Savior of a pure virgin bride, to free all those who trust in him from Satan's power and might. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Now to the Lord sing praises, all you within this place, and with true love and brotherhood each other now embrace. This holy tide of Christmas all others of the face. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and
The English version of one of Germany's best-loved carols comes from the 1853 publication Carols for Christmastide. The Reverend John Mason Neale, one of England's great hymn translators, captures the essence of the happy news of the first Christmas by his loose interpretation of In Dulce Jubilo. The melody of this medieval Latin-German carol may have first appeared in Klug's Geistliche Lieder in 1535, later published in the Piae Cantiones, the 1582 book of carols that was one of the finest in Europe. The music may have come from Heinrich Suso, a German mystic and Dominican monk. According to legend, the Blessed Henry Suso was visited by heavenly angels in a dream, danced and sang with them, and then when he awoke, immediately wrote down the words and music. However, his own autobiography, Das Buchlein der ewigen Weisheit, the Little Book of Eternal Wisdom, written in the third person, indicates that some version of the song existed before 1328. Suso supposedly had visionary experience throughout his life, including a number involving heavenly music. This historical intrigue only adds to the charming nature of the carol. The music for Good King Wenceslas comes from a Swedish spring carol titled Tempest Adeste Floridum, originally found in the 1582 carol book publication Piae Cantiones. The English lyrics, some of them quite fanciful and even scorned by critics of John Mason Neale, were based on a story of the nobleman Wenceslas, the Duke of Bohemia, supposedly a kind and good man, who was raised by his devoted grandmother. Wenceslas later became king, and during his brief reign, he converted his country to Christianity, providing his people with a period of great peace and serenity. He was known to be a just and merciful king, having considerable compassion for the poor and sick, until he was murdered in 929 by an evil younger brother who conspired with other family members and the pagan nobility against him. The Reverend John Mason Neale, who wrote and published his lyrics in Carols for Christmastide for this anonymous 13th century tune, was looking for a good role model for children to emulate. The generous Wenceslas fit the description nicely. Good King Wenceslas, despite its confounding lyrics, has since become a Christmas favorite for children and adults alike.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, give
Hark, the Herald Angels Sing was originally titled Hymn for Christmas Day when it was first written as a poem in 1739. The first line, Hark, how all the welkin rings, was changed 14 years later by George Whitefield, an Anglican clergyman who also co-founded Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, for the purpose of educating Indians. More lines of Charles Wesley's poem was revised in later years. Wesley, one of 18 children born of a modest family, brought his own changes to the original poem by expanding it from 4 to 10 stanzas. Wesley, along with his brother John Wesley, was an important figure in the founding of Methodism. In addition, he published about 4,430 hymns and wrote thousands more preserved only in manuscript. His most famous collection was Hymns for the Use of the People Called Methodists. William Cummings, an organist at Waltham Abbey, adopted the melody by Felix Mendelssohn to Wesley's hymn and first presented it on Christmas Day in 1855 because he felt the two went nicely together. His arrangement is generally used today. Mendelssohn was commissioned to compose the music for the 1840 Leipzig Gutenberg Festival. Written as a cantata and published as Festgesang dein Künstler, Opera 40, Mendelssohn's music, which eventually became the tune for Hark the Herald Angels Sing, helped to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the invention of the printing press by Johann Gutenberg. It accompanied the German lyrics for the second chorus below. Mendelssohn's music was not intended for a carol. The German composer thought the tune had potential as a military or national song, but wrote that, quote-unquote, it will never do to sacred words. The words must express something gay and popular, as the music tries to. Fortunately for us, Cummings didn't know about Mendelssohn's doubts, and the carol was published in England in 1857, and in the United States a few years later. Against that interesting backdrop, Hark the Herald Angels Sing emerges as one of our more expressively joyful Christmas carols. Although the standard text and tune of this traditional English carol were published in the 1911 volume English Folk Carols, the first strains of The Holly and the Ivy may have come from the days of Geoffrey Chaucer, originating from the Somerset and Gloucestershire vicinity. For centuries, holly and ivy were viewed as important symbols, and they came to be associated particularly with the Christmas season. During the Middle Ages, it was common for homes and churches to be decorated with holly because village folks believed it kept witches and tax collectors away. Wreaths made from it represented Jesus Christ's crown of thorns, and its red berries signified drops of red blood. Ivy was of pagan heritage, in keeping with wreaths worn by Bacchus, the Roman wine god. It was common then to dance around evergreen plants that did not die in winter, a practice stemming from the pagan celebration of the winter solstice. Perhaps the genesis of the holly and the ivy goes as far back as St. Augustine, when he landed in Kent in 596 AD, with 40 monks to spread Christianity among the Anglo-Saxons. St. Augustine, who was of noble Roman birth, likely continued the early Roman practice of wreath-giving or decorating hallways with garland made from holly for the midwinter feast, Saturnalia. The efforts were so successful that 2 years later, on Christmas Day, about 10,000 men of Kent and their families were baptized into the faith. In songs of Yuletide, the holly and ivy plants also represented the different genders. The holly was masculine, and the ivy was feminine. Often these symbols were used in comical verse. Eventually, the holly and the ivy took on much more religious coloration. Written as a poem by Edmund H. Sears on a cold December day in 1849, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear was published that same month in the Christian Register, a church magazine. A year later, Richard Storrs Willis wrote a flowing melody under the title Study Number 23 in the church chorals and choir studies, a piece of music that would soon be attached to Sears' lyrics. Willis, an editor and music critic for the New York Tribune at the time, had a different hymn in mind when he first composed the music. Later, after he had finished his studies at Yale University, he went on to study music in Europe under the German composer Felix Mendelssohn. The Reverend Sears, a farmer's son and direct descendant of one of the original Pilgrim Fathers, was pastor of the Unitarian Church in Wayland, Massachusetts. He loved poems, having begun writing verse at the age of 10 and reciting it during his moments of solitude. His poetic carol is particularly noteworthy for its incorporation of the theme of peace among men and nations, a sentiment hardly mentioned in other carols of the day, yet not surprising as the country stood on the brink of civil war. Also, the carol does not make any direct reference to the birth of Christ. Originally 5 stanzas long, the 4th stanza is generally omitted in most hymnals. Another carol written as a poem, Joy to the World, was the creation of the great hymn composer Isaac Watts. It was first published in 1719 in Psalms of David imitated in the language of the New Testament. One of the first tombs that may have been associated with the text was Antioch by George Frederick Handel, the famous Baroque composer, as suggested in the 1833 publication T. Hawk's Collection of Tunes. However, a number of other composers have also been connected with this tune, thus bringing some measure of doubt that Handel arranged it. Lowell Mason, the leading Presbyterian hymn composer in the United States, first united his magnificent tune with Watts' text in 1836. The two have since been inseparable. Watts may have found inspiration for his poem from Psalm 98, 4-9 of the Old Testament, particularly the verse lines,
"Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all the earth."
A popular carol that has become a staple among Christmas offerings, Joy to the World bursts forth in exuberant, hopeful, and triumphant notes about the good news of Christ's birth. text and fine melody of Les Anges de nos campagnes, possibly based on a traditional French Noel, come from either Lorraine or Provence. However, the melody of the refrain could be considerably older, perhaps dating back to the 14th or 15th century, when a number of macaronic carols were composed. Macaronic carols consisted of both vernacular and Latin lyrics, a combination required to please musically sensitive church officials who were still committed to the monopoly of Latin. Les Anges de nos campagnes may have been first published in Chouette du Cantique De Noel, an 1842 publication. The French text originally had 8 stanzas, although in subsequent publications it might number 5 or fewer. The English text, Angels We Have Heard on High, a loose translation by James Chadwick, numbered only 4 stanzas, one of which appeared in the 1864 London publication Crown of Jesus Music. The first printing of the English text, however, appeared in Chadwick's own Holy Family Hymns 4 years earlier. The version with which we are now familiar was printed in a 1916 volume, Carols Old and Carols New. The tune of Les Anges de nos campagnes was also used by James Montgomery, a Scottish newspaper editor, for his carol composition, Angels from the Realms of Glory. The refrain, Gloria in excelsis Deo, is also the title of the Latin song known as the Angels' Hymn, that was sung as part of a 129 AD religious observance of the Nativity at the behest of Telephorus, a Greek and the 7th Pope of the early Christian Church. The literal translation of this Noel means angels in our mountains. Tradition has it that on Christmas Eve, the shepherds in southern France would sing the angels' song Gloria in excelsis Deo to each other from their respective hilltops. This charming practice probably began during the Middle Ages in commemoration of the coming of the Christ child. One of America's most beloved carols, O Little Town of Bethlehem, was written as a poem by Phillips Brooks in 1868, when he was a young rector in Philadelphia, just 3 years after he had traveled to the Holy Land. There he was impressed by Christmas Eve services at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. That night, as he sat on a hill looking back at the village, while shepherds watched their flocks, he felt at peace with himself. He later told friends, "That experience was so overpowering that forever there will be a singing in my soul." Reverend Brooks persuaded Louis Redner, the church organist, to set his poem to music. Redner put off composing the music until the very last moment. Then, during the night, he had a dream that inspired him to begin work on his composition. Immediately upon arising, he wrote down the melody and offered it to the children the following morning. O Little Town of Bethlehem has since attained a lofty status in the international repertoire of traditional Christmas carols, and the tolling of its lyrics brings enchantment to the sacred story about a glorious starry night of long ago.
Above
O Tannenbaum, perhaps the best known carol from Germany, specifically refers to the Christmas tree, a much celebrated symbol in tradition and song in Germany since the 15th and 16th centuries. Representing loyalty and fresh life, which was especially appreciated during winter's darkest days, the tradition of a Christmas tree dates back to the days of the Roman Empire, when the evergreen was used in a decorative fashion during the period of the winter solstice in late December and early January. The evergreen was also used by Germans for pagan rituals celebrated at other times of the year, such as for St. Urban's Writ on May 25th in the city of Nuremberg, once a pagan stronghold. This is understandable because the symbol of the evergreen was well rooted in the old religions of Central Europe before they were totally eradicated by the early Christian Church. Saint Boniface, English apostle to the Germans, supposedly brought the custom of decorating evergreen trees with him. Martin Luther has also been credited with beginning the custom in the 16th century, and because of his association with it, parts of Protestant Europe adopted the practice. During his lifetime, in 1539, a Christmas tree was used for the first time in the Strasbourg Cathedral. The earliest printed reference to decorating Christmas trees was a 1561 Alsatian ordinance that dictated how large an evergreen bush must be before it could be cut down. Over the years, the custom spread to the United States and Canada and became a firmly established tradition. Several legends have sprung from the tree trimming practice, including one that relates how all the trees of the world bore the best fruit on the night the Christ child was born. The original O Tannenbaum is believed to have had only one verse, the text of which appeared in the 1820 publication Weisenbuch zu den Volksliedern für Volksschulen. Two additional verses were added by Ernest Gebhard Anschutz in 1824 for his school children to sing, as Christmas trees have become more common in the town of Leipzig. The melody belonged to an old Latin song that had been sung by German students for many generations prior to Anschutz's creation, having been published in 1799 in Melodien zum Mildheimischen Liederbuch. The music has also been adopted for a number of different texts, including the song Maryland, My Maryland. George K. Evans, co-author of the well-researched 1963 text, The International Book of Christmas Carols, provides the English translation. perhaps the best-known Christmas carol of all time, having been translated in 44 different languages, Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, Silent Night, has an interesting story about its creation. On Christmas Eve, in 1818, Franz Gruber, the church organist, had to quickly rearrange the planned music after the organ of his small village church, St. Nicholas in Obendorf, Austria, had broken down. Needing music to go along with the poetic lyrics of Reverend Joseph Moore, a Catholic priest, the organist composed a melody for 2 solo voices, a chorus, and guitar. As a result of the creative labors of both pastor and organist, the Christmas music repertoire was rewarded with what would become one of our most devotional carols. The source of inspiration for Reverend Moore's poem, probably written 2 years earlier, when the priest was in the service of another parish church in Austria, is open to some speculation. But one account with a plausible ring to it suggests a humble scenario. Accordingly, the Reverend Moore was visited by a villager who came to announce the birth of a child in a house of a young woodsman. At the behest of the anxious father, the priest quickly plodded through the snow to bring words of good cheer and blessings for the young mother in the house. The Reverend Moore, though weary from the trek through the heavy snow, was quite impressed by the pervasive and comforting silence, the snow, and the starry night. Upon his arrival at the woodman's humble abode, he was further moved when he gazed upon the small rough-hewn cradle where the baby lay, and the woodchopper tending to his wife at a nearby bed of pine logs. The priest was transfixed by the scene and overcome by a feeling of radiance and holiness about the place. It struck him that the surroundings bore a strong resemblance to how the birth of another child, the infant Jesus, had been described 1800 years earlier. After blessing the woodman's home, the Reverend Moore returned to his study and began reflecting on the scene he had just witnessed. While looking out across the snowy mountains and stars, he muttered to himself,
"Silent night, holy night."
In this holy mood, he may have written the simple words of 6 stanzas that softly proclaimed the joy and peace of the very first Christmas. 6 or 7 years after its initial church performance, an organ repairman hired to reconstruct the organ at St. Nicholas Church found a copy of the carol at the church and received permission to take it home with him. Soon after, traveling singing groups began to sing Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht in different parts of Austria and ultimately in other regions of the world, further spreading the carol's popularity. The song would become exceptionally popular in the United States after World War I, when returning war veterans remembered hearing it sung by German soldiers during Christmas truces. For a time, the carol was thought to be either of anonymous origin or from the hand of Johann Michael Haydn, who was noted for his compositions of sacred music, as well as for being the brother of the more famous Joseph Haydn. The carol was probably first published in the 1838 to 1840 period in a collection of 4 genuine Tyrolean songs. One English translation reduced it to 3 stanzas, and a widely accepted version was completed in 1863 by the Reverend John Freeman Young, who later served as the Episcopal Bishop of Florida in 1867. The wonderful result of these developments was a simple, loving, tender song, resonating even today with the true meaning of Christmas. Is it any surprise, then, that Silent Night now ranks as the most recorded song in history? traditional 12 days of Christmas extend from Christmas Day to the Epiphany, or from December 25th to January 6th, better known as the 12th night of the New Year. The 12 days of Christmas was meant to be sung during this period, but in the United States, it generally is not sung at all after Christmas Day. In fact, hardly any Christmas music, religious or secular, is heard in the United States after December 25th. Since a number of carols were intended to celebrate post-Christmas feast days, including the Epiphany, January 6th, the date honoring the visitation of the Magi, or wise men, it would be a nice practice to revive singing carols during this period. Possibly written around 1700 and quite likely based on a similar French song, the 12 Days of Christmas first appeared in the 1780 publication Mirth Without Mischief in England. The song was intended as a children's memory game. The first child recited the first verse, the second child recited the next, and so on until one player missed the verse, for which a penalty had to be paid. Recreating the festive air of secular carols from the early Renaissance era, it has been adapted to a number of lyrical settings. A recent account, perhaps more myth than fact, relates that because there was persecution of Catholics in England around the time, the 12 Days of Christmas was created as a catechism song for young Catholics to help them remember the lessons of their faith. Thus, true love referred to God. The partridge in a pear tree was Jesus Christ, symbolized as a mother partridge feigning injury to protect her helpless young from predators. The me, who receives the present, signifies every baptized person. The symbols of the 12 Days of Christmas were thus represented as follows. The partridge in a pear tree is Jesus Christ. The two turtle doves are the Old and New Testaments. The three French hens represent faith, hope, and charity. The four collie birds symbolize the four Gospels. The 5 gold rings are the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The 6 geese a-laying represent the 6 days of creation. The 7 swans a-swimming symbolize the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The 8 maids a-milking represent the 8 Beatitudes. The 9 ladies dancing are the 9 fruits of the Holy Spirit. The 10 lords a-leaping symbolize the 10 commandments. The 11 pipers piping are the 11 faithful disciples. And finally, the 12 drummers drumming symbolize the 12 beliefs in the Apostles' Creed. Today, the song retains its good nature and popularity in many parts of the English-speaking world. Veni, Emmanuel is possibly the oldest of our more notable carol hymns. In some quarters, it is believed that monastery monks composed the original hymn of 7 verses. They would sing 1 verse per day at Vespers, the late afternoon or early evening canonical hour of prayer, for 7 straight days prior to Christmas Eve. The music may have evolved over the years from Gregorian chant, based on several plainsong phrases of the Kyrie that were supposedly found in ancient French missals. The original words, possibly Latin antiphons, known as the 7 greater antiphons, or great O antiphons of Advent, because each of them began with the interjection O for the Messiah as he was addressed in various Old Testament texts, may date from the 9th century or earlier. However, the Latin lyrics of this carol can only be definitely traced back to 1710. The English conversion, O come, Emmanuel, was the creation of Reverend John Mason Neale, an eccentric Anglican priest with Catholic proclivities, who was also a composer and translator. Neale's first translation was produced in 1851. 2 years later, he wrote another one with altered text. Another Anglican, Thomas Helmore, produced a haunting melody 3 years later in hymnal noted to go with Neale's 1851 translation, and for the next 22 years a number of other settings were composed. Supposedly, Helmore changed some plain songs from the 12th or 13th century, but the oldest known predecessor is a 15th century processional used by Franciscan nuns. Because of his expertise in plain song and Gregorian chant, Helmore was closely associated with the Reverend Neale, and complemented Neale's scholarly work with ancient Greek and Latin texts. In 1906, Thomas Alexander Lacy produced another English version. Today, Veni Emmanuel is generally sung in 4 or fewer stanzas, and it is rare to find a hymnal carrying all 7 stanzas. But there is no doubt that the possibly long and storied evolution of this beloved carol hymn has provided us with a sacred and exceptional Christmas gift. A traditional English tune, probably originating from Yorkshire, the Wassail Song is one of very good cheer. The full 8-stanza text comes from W. H. Husk's 1864 carol collection, Songs of the Nativity. The word wassail is a salutation meaning to drink to one's health, and the reply to this salutation would be, "Drink hail!" The practice may go back to the 5th century, although the first mention of it appeared much later, in 1140. Its roots most likely come from an early dance form in northern England. During the Christmas season, carolers traveled from house to house bringing good wishes and carrying an empty bowl. The master of the house, being wassailed, was expected to fill the bowl with hot, spicy ale. Children were treated especially well as they went door to door, similar to American children at Halloween, seeking holiday goodies in return for their caroling and dancing. We Three Kings of Orient Are is one of the few carols whose theme is primarily about the visit of the kings, or wise men, to the Christ child in Bethlehem. Written in 1857 by the Reverend John Henry Hopkins, Kings of Orient, its original title, was later published in 1863 in his popular work, Carols, Hymns, and Songs. It quickly gained recognition outside the United States, especially in England, where it was the only American carol published in Christmas Carols, New and Old, a landmark 1871 collection that played a major role in reviving carol collecting and singing in England. Hopkins wrote the carol as a Christmas gift for his nieces and nephews while he was in New York serving, among other things, as an instructor of church music for the General Theological Seminar there. Because the music has an archaic flavor, the carol is often thought to be older than it actually is. Plus, the unique structure of Hopkins' carol allowed the kings to have direct speech and an opportunity for drama. The journey of the three kings as wise men, or magi from the word magoi, appears in the New Testament in St. Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. The Magi was a class of priestly astrologers and magicians in Persia. Some suggestions about the Magi and the Star of Bethlehem came from the Old Testament, namely passages from Psalms 68, verses 29 to 31, Isaiah 49, verse 7, and 60, verse 3, 6, and 10, and Numbers 24:17. During the early days of the Christian Church, the exotic story of the three kings caught popular imagination, and the three acquired names. Caspar, or Gaspar, the king of Tarsus, Melchior, the king of Arabia and Nubia, and Balthazar, the king of Saba or Sheba. One of the first images of them, depicting them as part of a creche scene worshipping the Christ child, appeared in the 4th century as a painting on a sarcophagus now located in the Basilica of St. Maximum, France. Since then, they have continued to be so honored and have become a permanent part of Christmas lore. An interesting custom has developed over the years regarding the three kings. Each year, after the heads of households have received their first Christmas card with a picture of the three kings on it, it is tacked over the front entrance of the house. This custom had its origins in Europe, where for centuries on the day of the Epiphany, or January 6th, parish churches blessed and distributed water and chalk for the blessing of homes. The water was used in remembrance of baptism. The chalk was used to mark over the front door the initials of the three kings and the numerals of the new year. For example, 19 plus C plus M plus B plus 99 for the year 1999, or 20 plus C plus M plus B plus 00 for the year 2000. From the greatest palaces to the humblest hovels, the chalk marks would be the same for all households. These markings were intended to lead the three kings, should they return, to easily find where Christ would be, in the hearts and minds of everyone. From the wealth of Christmas stories surrounding the three kings, it is understandable where Hopkins would have looked for his inspiration.
We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading.
Anonymous composers were prone to write lively secular songs just as much as those of a more serious and religious nature. This cheery English carol from the West Country of England was probably sung by waits, who were either watchmen or employees of municipalities licensed to perform or sing in parades and other seasonal celebrations, including Christmas, when they caroled in the streets. They probably drank too from wassail bowls, some of which could be quite enormous. Such street reveling during the Christmas festivities had its roots in antiquity and the pagan rites of the winter solstice. We Wish You a Merry Christmas gives us a good glimpse of 16th century English gaiety, and even today, its popular lyrics of good cheer encourage one and all to enjoy the holiday season. The famous tune Greensleeves is the basis for the music of the lovely carol What Child Is This? One of the earliest references to it was in 1580, when it was mentioned several times in Shakespeare's comedy play, The Merry Wives of Windsor. Strains of the music were also heard in the 1728 satirical ballad opera, The Beggar's Opera, by John Gay. Religiously inspired, William Chatterton Dix wrote his lyrics around 1865 as a 6-stanza poem titled The Manger Throne. Later he took 3 of the poem's stanzas and adapted them to the popular 16th century tune of Greensleeves. In 1871, the text was published in Bramley and Stainer's Christmas Carols, New and Old, a highly popular compilation. Because of Dix's efforts, and possibly because the Reverend Henry Ramsden Bramley may have brought together the tune and the lyrics in the 1871 publication, the legacy of What Child Is This? Has been sustained over the years by its unforgettable beauty.
What
first published sometime between 1698 and 1700 by Nahum Tate, a Dublin-born Irishman who became poet laureate of England, the words of While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks are based on paraphrasing of scriptural texts from St. Luke, chapter 2, verses 8 to 14. They were written for a tune, at the time over 100 years old, from the 1592 publication Whole Book of Psalms by Thomas Este. This could very well be the oldest Christian hymn in the form most familiar to us today. At one time, the singing of hymns was considered sacrilegious by some church preachers, particularly the Puritans, who urged their congregations to rely on biblical psalms for their singing material. Tate's Christian hymn, however, achieved the lofty status of being the only legally authorized hymn by the Church of England, an achievement further consolidated when the hymn was bound up for distribution along with the Book of Common Prayer. Since 1700, a number of variant tunes have been written for While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks. The first known union of lyrics and music was in the 1861 collection Hymns, Ancient and Modern. The music comes from an aria from the 1728 opera Cyrus, King of Persia, also known as Cyrus, by George Frederick Handel. The artistic creation of the great Baroque composer, coupled with Nahum Tate's lyrics, has produced a marvelously appealing Christmas hymn.
Angel
And that was carol number 25, While Shepherds Watch Their Flocks, performed by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and Chorus. Before we wrap up this playlist that you've been watching, I would like to impart one final message to each and every one of you. The children have opened their presents, and you have said your Christmas prayers on Christmas Eve. And now, before you can count all the candles in a Christmas Eve service, Christmas and the holiday season has once again come to an end. But don't be sad, because I found out a way to keep the Christmas spirit alive even after the holidays are over. May the spirit of Ron Clancy's best-loved Christmas carols always remain within your heart, wherever you go and whatever you do throughout the new year. Whether you prefer the hauntingly beautiful joyfulness of the religious carols, or the equally joyful and upbeat secular carols, or if you're one of those nostalgic types that enjoy Christmas time ever since they were little kids growing up, let us all thank the author who made this collection of Christmas carol history possible, Mr. Ron Clancy. This entire playlist is made in your honor. As long as we never forget the true meaning behind the Christmas carols that we love and adore every Christmas season, then someday in the future, we will be able to achieve God's wish, peace on earth and goodwill to men everywhere. But until then, this is son of Herodotus, wishing everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holidays. And most importantly, God bless us all, everyone.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The tidings we bring to you and your kin. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Now bring us some figgy pudding. Now bring us some figgy pudding. Now bring us some figgy pudding and bring it out here. The tidings we bring to you and your kin. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy